Hello and welcome to the Logos broadcast. In this episode, Fergus is joined by somewhat regular guests Graham Canton and Philip Swanson, two Orthodox Christians from the American South. On first glance, it would appear that modern cities symbolise the end of traditional ways of life. However, Graham notes the ironic reality that cities have ended up actually satisfying many of the human needs that were fulfilled in more rural or smaller scale settlements. This is largely because motor cars have so drastically interrupted so much of human interaction almost everywhere, except in very dense population centres. Philip also notes that his first experience of so-called traditional community came during his time in the Bronx in New York City, and later elaborates on some of the things that he says are necessary to make that pipe dream of homesteading possible. We go on to explore how to distinguish between authentic communities and cults. Towards the end of the conversation, Philip discusses what it is that makes an agricultural lifestyle more conducive to integrated religious worship. Finally, Graham and Philip object to the use of the term natural religion, and what this implies with reference to St. Maximus the Confessor's doctrine on the Logoi. Before we get into this conversation with Graham and Philip, here's 2.5 minutes of clips from the last episode. A conversation with Philip that dealt with the origin of cities and the inseparability of their foundation from religious experience.
And so it's this thing to provide these very basic needs, but it doesn't really fulfill the human condition in terms of providing community. In fact, it's sacrificed community in terms of quick access to food, more convenient access to food. That's had food, clothes, whatever goods and services you want to put on that list. But community has been sacrificed for that, and that's what you can definitely tell a difference in. It's like when you're that person moving away from your home, although driving on the interstate doesn't look all that different, it's when you get to the place it sort of hits you, and that's sort of the black pill, as you like to say. It's that point where it's like, oh shit, I'm not at home anymore. Like I'm in a very very different, depressing area, because there's always something about, like, even walking into your local Walmart back in your hometown as opposed to the one in New York State, Pennsylvania, wherever you want to throw the Walmart, right? So I think that's sort of the black pill. It's like, even though it's supposedly the same, like, it's like, not only does this suck, it sucks even more because I still can't get away from the human feeling that I'm in exile. I mean, yeah, with things like the Protestant revolt, as an Orthodox Christian, I would argue the schism between East and West obviously played a role in what the Protestants had to do, but that's a topic for another episode. But you start to see this shift. After that, you see more and more subsequent revolutions. You see the Second Agricultural Revolution, then you see the Industrial, or then you see almost simultaneously the Scientific Revolution and the Industrial Revolution. And these things begin and really end sort of traditional, the beginning of the end of, they're the end really of traditional civilizations. I mean, these sort of dichotomy between city and countryside is clearly seen from the beginning, from Cain founding the first city, but also the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Obviously, there's a sense in which Abraham is doing something right, and Lot is probably not making the wisest choice by moving closer to the city center.
This is the point at which we are joined by Graham, and the conversation changes direction considerably.
You guys are ready to talk paradigm shifts, then I'm down. But I don't want to shift the subject too quickly, you know.
We're getting there, but I think you can kind of make that out.
Has it been a fledgling endeavor?
I think we're nearly there. Philip, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can start shifting. Okay, well, how do we reclaim this today? What ceremonies can we still sort of hold on to? Grant, you and I can talk about the sort of the rogation days and like the blessings.
I don't want to talk about that.
What's that?
I don't want to talk about that.
You don't want to talk about rogation?
No, I want to talk about ground level experiences, man. I think we can really roll the subject right off of the modern city into the paradigm shift that I want to talk about.
All right, go for it then.
What's your paradigm shift?
Well, the paradigm shift is that people used to avoid the city for the exact reason that people now want it, right? And that's the moral of the paradigm shift. Like, and it's entirely appropriate too. I'm in a city right now. I'm in New Orleans, and it's like for the first time in a long time, I'm surrounded by like a density of people sufficient to which, or I'm surrounded by enough people that it's like this thing in my head is just turned on, and I'm like looking at the world differently. And it's like once you reach a certain population density, this switch turns on, right? And it's not even so much, I would suspect, the population density that's doing this, but I think I would say it's the idea that there could be more people for me to relate to in this place, you know. And normally that's something you get in a small town, right? But if you have like this sort of universal atomization of everybody, and it's not even like it's not exclusive to the city, but it's the small town, the medium town, the thriving metropolis, and everyone is becoming atomized, then there's this sort of reversal that'll take place by which you start to relate to more people that you've never met in a bigger place with more people. And I've been experiencing that in New Orleans. I mean, even a clerk or a cashier or someone on the sidewalk, it's like walking down the street in New Orleans, I will encounter somebody, right? And where I live right now, first of all, I would never be walking down the street in the first place, okay? Just to make that abundantly clear, I would be flying down a highway in a metal box, right? And the closest I'll get to an interaction there is flipping the bird to someone who cuts me off. But in New Orleans, I'm at a snail's pace with everybody, right? And in New Jersey, it was the same way. And even in smaller towns like Pensacola downtown, right? If you're walking somewhere and you need to be where you're going, you're like if I'm in Mobile, for example, and I need to go somewhere, I'm taking the car, right? And so it's not just like recreational. Like cities aren't just recreationally important, right? I mean, even if you're going somewhere by necessity, you've got to walk, and so this pretty much accounts for every hour of the day. You can be meeting people, talking to people, making connections, getting this sort of like serotonin switch in your brain. Seeing all these faces and meeting eyes with everybody. I've met, I don't know, 20 people just in the span of like 3 hours because I wanted to, and back at home, seeing as there's no real walkable infrastructure, I'm meeting 20 people in like 2 months, right? And anybody else I meet it's all at work or whatever, And so what Philip is talking about, traditional society, this whole idea of like intentional community, right? Obviously, yeah, you don't want to be with everybody in your intentional community, whatever. But this idea of there being a binding principle, right, has been returned back to the locale, right? It was it was taken by the car, which is regrettable, and it was put back into place in the cities, which is very backwards, in my opinion. It's very backwards. Small towns, they're supposed to be walkable and as it were immediate, and the car has taken that. And also, small towns are, I would say, the most, if you will, susceptible to community, and the car has taken that as well. So now you've got cities. It's very strange. But look, I want to know what Philip's got to say about this very badly. This is the paradigm shift I was talking about, right? Like, why in the hell are cities now filling the job of towns and intentional communities, whereas previously they would have been, the demonic adjacent to the very thing we want? Philip, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, you see the two extremes of the situation, right? You either have people starting these homestead communities way out in the middle of nowhere where they don't need cars anymore, or you have the city. I mean, once again, where I first sort of lived and discovered traditional community was in New York City. Once again, is it a shitty place to live and is it horrible? Absolutely. It's horrible. It's a terrible place to live. But that was the first place I was able to discover really and live in a traditional community, right? And now I don't know as to why this is. Maybe it's just the vast number of people there that sort of have the same sort of shared common views. But once again, it's like it's not as it once would have been because it's pockets of the city that you are gravitating to and almost seeking to find, right? Like I would say my experience of New York City was living in traditional community because I stayed towards certain pockets and areas of the city that would have been smaller and subdivided, right? I mean, this is how all cities would have been subdivided, rather than the city as a whole.
Gents,
What's that, Graham?
I was trying to find a good time to interject before I forgot my.
Oh, go ahead.
What I was going to say. Look, gents, would we agree that people's interests are largely like less virtuous than they have been in the past these days? Would we agree about that?
Broadly speaking, I think we could, yeah.
Yeah.
So here's what I'm thinking. Basically, is Philip's like, yeah, we've got like this. This is the irony: is you would think that the city would be the place where this doesn't happen, but maybe it's population density. So now that we're openly speculating about like why the city is filling this role that like previously a smaller town would have, let's think about the fact that basically a city is a conversion, a convergence of interests, right? And if we can agree that people's interests are largely less virtuous than they would be in the past, then that's the irony. Is like you still have this kind of look. This is what I'm getting at. Basically, is convergence of interests produces power, and people have suspected that conspiracies basically boil down to this, right? Is if you got a bunch of people that go to the same school, same place, same friends, blah, there's going to be a convergence of interests that amounts to basically a conspiracy theory. But anyway, the moral of the story is that convergence of interests creates power, power creates money, and people move to these metro areas because that's where the power and the money is. So I would say that it seems, the cities still have kind of like their demonic adjacent characteristic, but it's like any power, any money, any hub, it's going to draw good people to it as well, right? So a demonic adjacent city is gonna bring in the baddies, just like it always does. And by baddies, I mean bad people. But it's also going to bring in the people that kind of have to follow on the coattail of those people, just like they always do. And so it's almost like good people are still captive to bad people, no matter what. So even bad people have this kind of enterprise on community and walkability, right? I mean, New Orleans is actually quite disgusting, frankly. And if I really wanted to be a negative Nancy about it, I would run around and find a million things bad with it. But I think this is what's going on here: is you've got the convergence of interests, and this creates a centrality of power, and good people go to it. And I think they're way more likely to go to convergencies of interests in New Orleans than they are to go to a place where interests converge, like a small town in Alabama or something, right? Like no one's like, oh, I've got to go to Timbuktu, like I've got to go to freaking Albuquerque. Like no one really jonesing to go to these retard places because nothing's going on. Nothing's going on, and this is where we're approaching maximum autism levels. By the way, I'm talking like blow the lid off autism, maximum autismo, and the reason is because now that people are starting to recognize this conflict, and they're saying, oh shit, all interests are converging in places of power, and people that are in power suck. We have basically two options: form a kind of like a skin tag community in one of these cities, like a traditional block, BLOC, or something in a city, not unlike such things exist in Dublin, such things exist in Alabama, blah, name wherever we're from, blah. But the alternative is to homestead, and then you're really stuck with the autists, because to convince enough people with not that much power to do something that mimics basically something very powerful is going to draw pretty much the dredges of society in. So Philip, I think, has a fortunate situation, right? Because how big is your town, Philip?
Not big. I mean, if you're saying Syracuse, it's like 100,000.
I mean, that's not small, but it's not big. But like, basically, like 200,000 is like this critical cutoff, below which it becomes increasingly difficult to find your block. But like, yeah, Syracuse, for example, it works, right? But you've got all these people trying to figure out ways to basically say they're not interested in making it work. They're interested in either like submitting to this like block traditional groupage in a big city, or doing the farming thing, the Benedict option, right? Is that what it was called, Philip? That thing from 2019.
Yeah, Roger's book. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think here's the thing. It's like, I think the LARPing, I mean, when I was in New York City, you see these trads. I'm not going to name the parish there. Anyone who's familiar with New York City probably knows what trad Catholic parish I'm referring to. But you have sort of the LARPers of like, I'm going to go out and, we need to start a homestead, blah. And it's like, as they're sitting here being oppressed by, the wilds and all the things in New York City. It's like LARPing as a homestead is not going to cut it. Like forcing something, once again, because to refer to back earlier in the episode, you and I were talking about, Fergus, these communities were not set up as LARPs. It's not like, you know what, guys, like, let's start a community. It's not this human thing that you can set up. If you want a real traditional community, it actually has to develop organically and slowly. If you don't want all, like, as you said, the autists coming in and screeching and yelling and gnashing because the skirts are too short or something, right? It has to be a natural convergence of ideas. It's like, hey, we're doing this thing. Oh, okay, that sounds cool. Here, can I come help you a few days a week? I'm not asking, don't pay any money, right? And then slowly this thing gets built up. And that takes sacrifice. Like, you have to let go of the idea of you're going to make a lot of money doing this. Right? Because a lot of these homestead communities want to continue to live the same life that they already had with in addition to what they think is, some modern, to some like heroic martyrdom that they're going to I'm going to do so many sufferings. It's like, no, you're going to have to deal with the suffering of like living next to somebody that you're not always going to agree with on everything, on how everything's going to be run. No, like, I'm going to work real hard from sun up to sundown. Yeah, you will. But in addition to that, there's this whole other slew of things that's going to come along with it that you're probably not going to like. Right? It's not just about being economically feasible. It's not about, getting away from the government. Right? Because if the government wants something, they're just going to come in and take it anyway. It doesn't matter how far you are. The technocratic society extends. It's everywhere. At this point, unless you, I don't know, go in the middle of Greenland and live on an iceberg, like, you can't escape it. So you have to, in order for this thing to work, right? It almost, in a way, I'm not going to say it has to come to you, but you have to give up more than you think in order to make it happen. And that's not to say you have to invest more money or whatever, or, do the right amount of online research, right? But it involves a repentance in your own, it involves a cultivation of your own heart first, and a repentance of yourself. And then you can move forward into building up these sort of intentional communities. It's not like just some good idea that somebody has. It has to be given from above in order to move in that direction. The binding principle, if you will.
I mean, obviously that the cultivation of the right spirit, or the cultivation of your heart, presumably it's a kind of it's a bit of a feedback loop. Like, it's a bit, wouldn't you think it's a bit like getting married? Like, you can't be ready to get married, or you can't be ready to have a kid. But I suppose that situation forces certain virtues out of you, doesn't it? Like, you can't know you're ready to go homesteading, presumably. Now,
Oh, absolutely.
so Philip, somehow I'd like to bring us up to the church calendar and how you find that in your current situation. I think, would it be fair to say Graham's making a strong case for Graham's making a good redemptive case for the city, and maybe highlighting some of the drawbacks of being seen to withdraw from the modern world and go into these communities which attract certain people who might be miserable or whatever.
Just to clarify my position, I still think it's better to have like a homestead community. At the end of the day, I think, well, sheesh, you said so. You've got good questions, Fergus, because now you're getting me to reevaluate my position on air, as it were. But basically, I think a lot of the negatives of cities have been kind of mitigated by the car in many cases, right? Like, there's not horse shit all in the streets. Everything's mostly quite clean. We have sanitation. And, like, there are exceptions to that in the city, of course. But probably I would say that even the exceptions, the gross parts of the city, are maybe even cleaner than the gross parts of a city 250, 300 years ago. This is amazing. I'm just reevaluating my entire life, and you're recording it as it's happening. It's amazing. Anyway, that's all I have to say.
Yeah, I mean, Graham, I think, makes some good points about, and I tend to agree with him that there are, it, like, when you're in this right pocket, right, you things sort of mesh together. The only problem with that is you can't stay in that pocket. You're not going to be able to stay in that pocket within these cities. It's not going to last. And I don't think it's sustainable, and here's why. I think because when you're in sort of a home, I don't even want to necessarily call it a homestead community, because that still sounds a little bit LARPy. Pause. We're going to have to cut this. Sorry.
Philip, we had a slight interruption there, but you were saying about how it's difficult to even say homesteading without it being a LARP.
Yeah. I mean, once again, yeah, Graham's points about the city was good. Yeah, it is hard to, right, there's a certain force aspect that homesteading can take on, right? You see these communities, like there's some community out in California that's like based on the principles of Medjugorje or something weird like that, right? And it's like, okay, well, so there's these strict rules that they, oh, you can't drink, hard alcohol, and it's like, okay, look, you have to have structures in place, but like you can't just design a homestead community to be just like a city with these certain restrictions, right? It's expected of people that they shouldn't do certain things, of course, right? You don't want drug trafficking or something going on, or whatever on one of these like small intentional communities, right? But what has to happen is that, I guess the advantage that it has over, you can't just have a homestead community and structure it in the same way as you do a city. It has to be different. Why? Because everyone is involved in the same sort of work. Like that's ultimately what sets it apart. Everyone has a shared life in the most complete sense. Some of these things in the city, like I said, you'll have people going to the same church or whatever, and that's great. That's all fine and dandy in some of the small towns too. What do they do when Monday rolls around? Well, they go back to their jobs that make them want to blow their brains out, right? A lot of times they go back to their cars. They go back to, oh, I don't, now I have to go home. And some of them are married, some of them are not. They're not hanging. I don't even want to use the word hanging out, but they're not interacting on a daily basis necessarily. They might send a text here or there, but they're not actually having a shared life.
I think I don't think you need to apologize by saying like the chit chat after mass or after divine liturgy, presumably it's the same. Like that doesn't really extend beyond half an hour outside the church, and that's at a push.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times, yes.
Yeah.
I would say the community that I'm in is very different. I would say where I have, so these things are starting to be put in place. And I think in a lot of Orthodox communities they're starting to be put in place. They're starting to move forward. I don't even want to use that word, that phrase, but they're starting to become more intentional. Like we've started doing things such as during Theophany season, the priest comes around and blesses everybody's house. Well, okay, so the priest comes over, has, blesses everyone's house, has dinner at that said person's house. And then at the end of a local area, right, he'll do the final house. And at that final house, everyone on that day comes to that house who's in that area and gathers and has a feast there together. These sorts of things. I mean, the whole farm project, at least in a lot of ways, is meant to be a place where the community can sort of fully come together, right? Not just, oh, we can do farm stuff together, but we can pray together, right? We can grow the crops together. And that prayer should feed out into every aspect of what we're doing. And that's really what's going on. It's that sacrifice that it is the liturgy that sort of flows out and fills all those relationships, right? Because you'll start to see, at least I'm starting to see my circles are becoming smaller and smaller in terms of I'm not going to work over here and then, absolutely hating everything and then going back to church and be like, wow, what a relief. Now I have to start another stupid week at this stupid place, right? There's a certain joy. There's a continuity in what I'm doing rather than sort of this jumbled bits and pieces. It's like, yes, okay, I can intellectually assent to the church being the center of my life, but like when I'm going to work 7 days a week for, random guy that I don't even get along with or have any shared life with at all, things start to right? Things feel disoriented, things feel fractured, things feel not in their proper place. And I think what this farm sort of project is doing is breaking that down, is getting back to everybody being around each other every single day and having a shared common life in all aspects, not just in going to church together.
So what is the relationship between the church and the farm?
I mean, there's not an official, like, okay, that, anything official, but it's a place where parishioners are starting to turn to, at some point, hopefully in the future, to find employment. They can't really, most people, at least me and all the other people who are at the church are volunteering there right now, but like at a certain point, employment is going to be a part. People coming and living there, having cabins there for people to come and live / have retreats on, that sort of thing, right? So I think it's huge. I mean, the church and the farm are very interconnected. For the big fundraiser for the church each year, the farm donates a bunch of chickens to cook for this fundraiser. So the relationship is very close, and I think it's only becoming closer.
Graham, you talked about the last time we did one of these. You talked about the horseshoe and how far left and far right people are both kind of getting on the homestead thing. Are you aware of some sort of a coherent trend, or is it just kind of isolated situations, but where people are doing kind of like what Philip is doing, but not in such an explicitly religious community?
No, I'm not
So,
aware.
yeah.
Philip's situation is unique, I would say, and in my experience. I think most people are wussies, truly. I don't think they're going to basically even conceive of the organizational level to, do like a homestead or a farm or whatever. Like people are comfortable at the end of the day. People complain about being stuck at home and they just watch TV all day and their life sucks. But fundamentally, they prefer that, truly. And I think that's, Philip's got the will of an ox, and so this whole farm thing really works for him because he's not a wuss, right? But the problem is finding enough people that aren't wusses, and B, making sure that they aren't so much of a wuss that they can't organize a societal solution. It's like yeah, I don't even know if I just answered your question truly. In my experience, have I no, man. Although I do have a relevant example. So I've got family that does the homestead thing, and I would say that they land on the horseshoe for sure. And this is something that's largely made my adherence to horseshoe theory was only strengthened by this family that does the homestead thing. But something that's always kind of bugged me about the homestead situation, especially when I think about Philip, is it can be very lonely. Forgetting the social filter that people have, like if they hear that you're homesteading, they're instantly, basically gonna deem you a loser and like a socialite or whatever. And so I always thought, like, Philip's doing the farm thing and it's super cool and I would like to do it as well. And I'm one of the wussies I was just talking about, actually. But it's very lonely. It's very lonely. And so I see my family. I've got this, the family that does the homesteading on freaking across the world, basically, in an insanely different part of the country. And it seems like it might be kind of lonely for them too, right? And so, and by the way, Philip and this family, they're on different sides of the horseshoe, right? 100%. But they're dealing with the same issue. They're falling into the same lines and falling into the same issues, which is very interesting. And so I would say, it's just an anecdote really about how difficult it is to actually get these things rolling and actually enjoy life truly while you're doing it.
And it could be a case for the argument that you always, for something to sustain itself. Maybe Philip, you can talk about broader things here, but for something to sustain itself over time, there needs to be a higher binding principle that brings someone together. It can't just be some really rich person has enough money to start their own homestead like that. That can't multiply itself out in any way that'll last. Or as we've been talking about, like there's maybe the hippie thing, but it seems to just kind of fizzle out. Or people living in a commune, they collapse in one way or another, don't they? I want to be fair. That's why I keep stopping myself. I don't want to straw man these other, movements. But maybe that would be your argument, is that for this to actually work, and maybe for it indeed not to be a LARP, there has to be this shared belief system, or acting out of a religious worldview or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, to go back to the founding of the first cities, like we talked about, they were founded because of a shared religious experience, right? It was founded upon the common religious experience of a group of people. If they had, quote, different religious experiences or different ways of coming to, as we like to say today, different ways of coming to know to know whatever God, right? Like these places would not have been started. They couldn't have been started because it wasn't the farming that was binding them together. They had something that bound them together, and as a result, they started farming and started building these cities and started settling down. But the community was already together to begin with. It's not necessarily about it's about all aspects being shared. So it's a prerequisite if you're going to do one of these things. I think it's a prerequisite if it's going to last, that there is a shared religious experience, right? That you're going to the same place to worship, right? That you're worshiping in unity, right? Like that has to be the case, because that is the highest sort of binding agent there is, right? Like the higher things go up, in a way you could say, the higher in which you're bounded upon the hierarchy, right? The more stable the thing's going to be, the more you're able to sort of achieve the goal, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does. And I'm thinking of cults, because you think, obviously, they're not virtuous things or whatever. Like these guys who went out to these islands and they all drank, they all drank the Kool-Aid?
Yeah.
That's something that, in a way, that supports what you're saying, that these kind of cult leaders, wouldn't it be true to say they have to create a quasi-religious experience to get people with them, and they have to personify some sort of messiah to bring people with them? So it's not like some guy comes along and makes an economic case and then brings all these people along. Do you know, there is that religious element. Obviously, these things are, you might say, profane enterprises, and that's why they die. But there is some kind of overlap there, I think. Yeah. Just a quick tidbit. People, maybe Graham and Philip, you could give your own answers to this. A lot of people kind of mock different churches or religion in general. They say, "Oh, you're in some cult." What's a kind of a test to say, okay, this is a legitimate religion or this is a cult? Maybe that's too broad a question to be answered simply. But what are some helpful ways to distinguish between these guys, like what was the name of the guy who was in Charles Manson, and a priest or whatever?
I mean, yeah, it's like, I mean, I don't know. At least in terms of a community, it's like, does it come from does it come from a previous tradition? Is it actually based on some actual real tradition that's been passed down for thousands of years? Or is it just some guy, once again, it's a LARPer, right? Or is it a LARPer? Someone who's making up their own stuff? Because once again, like it's almost meta, right? It's like you need the pattern of a shared life passed down through thousands of years from Christ. You have to have that, right? And the thing itself has to be a product of sort of organic way of living. It can't just be like, all right, guys, we're going to make a homestead now. Like, it doesn't work. It has to be given to you, just like tradition. Tradition is not something that you make up. It's something you receive from above. And same thing with the homestead stuff. It's like, you can tell if it's phony, if it's like, oh yeah, well, Our Lady of Medjugorje says this, so we're going to make this homestead now, right? It's like, that's not organic either, because now you're LARPing, because now you're not taking something received from thousands of years. You're not receiving something. You're making it up yourself and you're building Babel, if you will. Right? Like that's what you're doing, if that makes sense.
How are you receiving something sorry, how is what you're doing different? Because you obviously didn't grow up in this situation. It's not like your forefathers, or would you say you're joining a wider body that is thousands of years old?
I mean, in terms of orthodoxy.
No, I'm talking about you doing the homestead adjacent type thing.
No, but it's something that came to me. It's not something that I just was like, you know what, I'm going to start my own homestead. Someone came up to me and said, "Here, would you like to do this? Here's in a way, here's a gift that I'm giving you. Right? Here's how you could."
Can't, as it were, you can't force it.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
It's going to crumble.
That makes sense.
Force anything. It's going to come to naught if you do. So yeah, it's something received. It was something I myself received. It's not something I decided to like. I didn't go on the internet and search like Orthodox homestead communities and then pick up everything and move to one. It's something that came to me. I'm not saying that like there's something wrong with if you. There's not something like you're wicked and bad if you do that. That's not the claim I'm making whatsoever. I'm saying is like it has to be given to you. It's not something that you can just like make up and do. Once again, that's not to say that it doesn't take sacrifice. As we read earlier from Merchiliades' quote, you do have to slay the dragons that are there. You do have to put in this work. You do have to conquer these demons, right? You do have to conquer the chaos that of the surrounding world around you. Even more so today than you. I would argue almost even more so today because there's so much more working against you than just the natural world, so to speak, right? You have the influence of technology and all these things, which sure can make it easier, but also make it 100 times harder to want to move in that direction because you're so fat and lazy and comfortable on your smartphone.
Graham, I asked Philip about just a way to distinguish, the true religion from the cult, or the authentic homesteading from the lark. Could you maybe give us some tidbits on what you think of as helpful distinguishers in either or both of those categorizations?
Look, I think this has always been an incentive for me to get like ridiculously rich. Basically, I think the only real surefire way to tell if you're dealing with a legitimate, homestead community or something is if you've got money behind it. And I hate that that's true, but like these things require benefactors. And if I won the lottery tomorrow, I would probably, fund the development of 3 or 4 independent communities. I mean, shoot, I would pay for the education of people to, learn trades or whatever to sustain the community, right? It's all ultimately all homesteading is basically a micro scale city building experiment. People are thinking infrastructure. They're thinking basically what this issue boils down to is there is a contingent of people that don't think that the infrastructure we have right now is sufficient. And then, of course, we stretch the definition of the word infrastructure, right? There's social infrastructure, religious, blah. But the critique is not just physical; it's the whole kit and caboodle. And I think if people start to reframe this idea of infrastructure into something more broad, we'll all be able to kind of have this radar, this sense of what legitimate homesteading and community building looks like. But people keep looking at it as an escape. And I think until people look at it less as an escape and more like alternative infrastructure, yeah, that'd be good for everybody. That would just be a good thing.
So suppose, Philip, what you've done, you have sacrificed a huge amount to move towards what you're trying to move towards. You live very far from your parents. You have very few friends your age in your locale, and you're gonna be poor probably for the next while, at the very least, if not for the rest of your life. So either you're insane or you have there's obviously a reason, like there's a better reason to do this, So why bother go back to this? And maybe you could more broadly talk about the notion of progress, which again, it's another Lord of Spirits podcast. They're like, is progress even a thing? Because we do think of you always think of going back to tradition and not as tradition. We don't think of traditional way of living as something that's continuous. It's like
Yeah.
something that, even though that's probably what it is, isn't it?
It absolutely is something. I mean, this is what tradition is. It's like tradition is not just some like old thing that like we sort of look back at and like that's nice, right? Like the trad cats. It's like, no, this is something I can actively live and imbibe now. That has been given to me from thousands of years ago. Not just like, oh, that's a nice old thing. Something you continue to participate in.
Yeah. So what does that look like? Because like I outlined, you're sacrificing a huge amount to do what you're trying to do on this farm.
Yeah, I mean, because because I can most fully see and help order the world in the way in which it's supposed to be ordered. Okay, that's a lot of words and maybe doesn't mean a whole lot of people. What does that mean? I can now, instead of like saying, hey, you're going to work XYZ day, right? Like Monday through Friday, and you're going to work a 40-hour week. And then on top of that, you're going to work with a bunch of bozos who you don't even like. Not even don't even like, maybe you like them just fine, but you sure as hell don't have any sort of shared beliefs or shared way of living with them other than the fact that you work at the same damn place, right? That doesn't mean anything. You work at the same, oh, well, okay, big deal. You don't go to church with them. You don't hang out with them. At least I don't, right? And so the living on these places does not necessarily, it entails a different way. It entails an entirely different mode of existence. So instead of working, set hours all throughout the year, no matter what the hell the sun is doing, no matter what the weather outside is doing, right? No matter what the church calendar says is happening, I'm going to continue to do the same crap that I've been doing every day. Instead, your life is structured now on what God is providing for you. The entire thing is based on a sort of tradition, if you will, right? It's like, okay, these crops are going to come back at this time. We're going to harvest at this time, right? Okay, well, the harvest coincides with, I mean, it was perfect. Like this year, I'll give an example. The blessing of the herbs and the blessing of the fruits that coincide at the Feast of the Transfiguration, the Feast of the Dormition, really the first fruits. Right. Oftentimes it's like, okay, I've seen it done in some of these trad cat parishes before, and it's like, okay, yeah, we offered our fruits that we bought from the grocery store, or maybe at best that I got from my little garden. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's not like that's bad or something, but there's a whole different feel to it when you're bringing the stuff that you grew and that your livelihood depends on it. Right. So like this year, my boss brought the guy who owns the farm at the parish brought a bunch of stuff to church to be blessed on those days, right? Because that's the first fruit offerings. You're giving this thing to God, right? As saying like, hey, we're dependent upon you to receive. Because once again, tradition is all about receiving that which is from above. And
so if you're farming, would you say it's more intuitive to think of everything as something that you're given? Like you basically you're more humble, as more at the you're more vulnerable in a sense, but obviously you become more competent to deal with that as well. Whereas if you think of 40 hours a week and then you're in control, you go to the grocery store and you have the heating on, and
yeah,
there's a complete, I suppose it is a complete restructuring of your own identity and what you're capable of and what you are owed.
Yeah, absolutely. It absolutely is. Right. I mean, you see with this, right, like in the Middle Ages, you had these rogation days. And what they would do during the rogation days, these would take place before the Ascension, 3 days before the Ascension. And so they would process around the first 2 days with banners and a dragon. Basically, they would have this standard or an image of a dragon they would process around with. And on the third day, they would have just the shorn tail, basically saying they've slayed the dragon. And they would do this, and they would go around and bless all the fields. The Protestants ended up hating this because they're like, oh, this is stupid. You're going around saying the Gospels to the corn in the field in order that it grows better. What's that going to do? That's superstitious and silly. But it's like thinking about where's the corn coming from? Where's this all being provided from above? So you're supplicating, you're asking God for a good harvest, right? Because if bad weather comes, you're not getting anything. Right? Frost comes, as soon as snow gets in, nothing's growing. Right? So you're utterly and entirely dependent upon God. And in that community, you're utterly and entirely dependent upon one another, right? In the broader church community as a whole. And that scales up right? That these smaller sort of things scale up to God providing all things for you. And so you can recognize that, I think, more clearly when you're in that situation in which you can actually participate in the feasts of the church. Like, we don't understand the significance of Christmas anymore. At least it's really hard for us to, because we've gotten away from the sort of this agricultural kind of society. It's like there's a big deal with the light coming in the darkness. Like, that's a huge deal. It's not just some like arbitrary thing, right? It's these seasons that we're experiencing in our day-to-day lives are not arbitrary anymore, because we don't have total control over them with this machinery. I mean, I guess you can in a lot of these big chemical-based farms, but in a normal, real sort of farm, like, or community, you can actually enter into and experience the feast and understand what they really mean at a practical level. Not just like, oh, that's nice, I'll just like think in my head about this, whatever thing Jesus did today.
So to leave the bunker, what Pope Benedict called the bunker, you kind of have to go out into creation. You have to be at the mercy of creation in a way. So you're not worshiping the land or anything, but you're getting in tune. I think maybe, is that what you mean when you're always saying, I want to live in accordance with the patterns of reality? That all sounds very abstract, but maybe that's where the rubber hits the road, is the fact that you are dealing with creation, as Graham would say, in a way that's raw. Where if you're always dealing with the machine, you're never really thinking. I suppose you think of man as God, because man is the one who created the machine.
Yeah. And like, I mean, the thing is like, how do I phrase this? It's not just like, oh, hippy dippy, I'm going to go, love the nature and the flowers and like, go do cow worship or whatever. It's to, act like a hippie or something. What it is, it's cultivating these things. It's the first commandment, right, that God gives, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. What does that mean? Well, it means to shape reality. It means to shape reality, right? To do the things that God does, to order the creation, right? And when you start ordering the creation and living harmoniously with it, then you can truly experience this life in Christ, because you can see what he's doing in these patterns and how they correspond to the liturgical calendar. Because once again, none of these things are like accidental. People are like, oh, well, pagans did this and now Christians are doing it. It's like, yeah, because that's how God has structured the world. It's not like Christians just came along and decided to like copy the things that the pagans were doing. This was the things they were already doing and the patterns that they already recognized, right? And the things that they were already participating in. So it's not just like, oh, let's go love nature and do hippy dippy stuff. It's once again, it's very practical. It's seeing and living out what God is doing in the creative act and what God is doing in the liturgical feast days and participating in those things.
So when people talk about what you said, like, oh, the pagans used to do this and now the Christians do it, is that what they mean? Is that what's meant by the term natural religion? Is that what the pagans were doing? Is that what that is?
I mean, I'm not exactly familiar with the term natural religion.
Graham, I mean, in there, that's a term you see in like catechisms and stuff, isn't it? It's like religion minus revelation, basically, isn't it? It's what people would end up doing if they didn't have revelation.
I mean, seeing as well, I do know about this idea of natural marriage, right? And the principle would seem to be the same if you would have just changed the marriage to religion, right? Like, what will transpire without revelation? Yeah, I mean that. I don't know if that's like a real term or not, but for all intents and purposes, it makes sense.
I mean, to hit on that, what does St. Paul say in the book of Romans, though? He admonishes them because he's like, look, you had the patterns of the stars. You should have known God was coming. Right? I mean, the Persians did. The three kings did, right? They came over, right? Because they recognized the patterns of that which was above. Right? They saw the pattern in the sky and they knew what to do. So this is why St. Paul admonishes them. So it's all around. It's there. It's the logia, as St. Maximus talks about.
I think this idea of natural religion I think it's a little bit Well, a little bit dishonest. Based on what Philip is saying there, it's like there are so many different types of revelation, right? And if we approach the subject with like this kind of new epistemology and scientific method, blah blah blah, you know, then really at the end of the day, the criteria for revelation becomes smaller and smaller and less significant. So eventually you can explain away every ounce of revelation, right? And so this idea of the logi is Maximus. And Maximus says these patterns in creation being revelatory ipso facto, right? By virtue of the creator, right? And then there's really no such thing as natural religion. Nothing really will occur in isolation because there is no isolation. We're not in like this idea vacuum, right?
Yeah.
There is no idea vacuum. Everything must be filled at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And somebody will fill it, whether it's the Holy Trinity or some other malevolent force, right? It'll be filled. So natural religion, and it's got a, I would say, a polemic charge to it.
Yeah.
I don't think it does at all. I mean, maybe I misused the term. I don't think it has like a. I don't think it has that. Oh, that's
Well, I think, by virtue of what it entails, what it implies, it's somewhat charged. Natural religion, like what people will believe in isolation. There's no isolation,
But surely, well, there's isolation from
Christian
revelation.
But no. That's
As
so.
you
What
can,
Maximus the Confessor is saying basically is that there's this revelation inherent to everything, right? Like you can surmise what must be revealed from everything, right? I mean, it's the smoke from the fire idea of Aquinas, but like, a little bit more complicated. Is well, there's this whole, in an IQ test, what they will do is they will give you these patterns and ask you to basically infer what the pattern will do after a sequence. And that's the logi that Maximus is talking about. We have the tools to discern what the pattern looks like and who it's from, right?
but there must be a way of distinguishing like written revelation from.
Well, yes, of course, yeah. There's like special revelation, blah.
Yeah.
Personal revelation, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. But there is once again this ingrained sort of these ingrained patterns that point to Christ that I think Maximus says like you can go to God through them. But ultimately he says like just knowing them, right, is just intellectually assenting to them doesn't mean anything. Going and participating in them is how you actually know them. And once again, this is the thing about the wise men that they did is they saw these patterns. And it's like, okay, all the pagans are like, yeah, we intellectually assent to them. But the wise men went and participated in it. Right? That's the difference.
And that's what made them wise.
Yes. I mean, I think Bernard of Clairvaux says something to the degree of like, they gave up their wisdom, right? Their knowledge in order to become wise. In order to become truly wise.
Wise men still seek God, Scripture says.
Okay, lads, thanks a million. I don't know if we're going to be able to pick up on this, but I think we'll do our best. Next time, we'll hopefully do a little bit better. Thank you both for your time. And thank you if you made it to the end of this video. All the best and see you next time.